a conspiracy debunked in many cases for these folks actually strengthens their broader great conspiracy theory, which is that there is a group of small elites who are running every aspect of your life and they get away with everything. Or maybe facts and evidence should be necessary when you make outsized allegations. The most controversial story of the day, the Epstein Files. There are none, apparently. Now, again, a lot of people were shocked by this. I'm less shocked by this than some. The reason being, whenever there's this level of speculation without any sort of supporting evidence, it's not a shock to me when all that sort of falls apart. Michael Tracy, a journalist with whom I frequently disagree on a wide variety of issues, Michael Tracy has a thread on X where he explains, he said, the key Epstein victim who made the most sensational claims of being trafficked to powerful third-party individuals, Virginia Giuffre, was not even called by prosecutors as a witness in the 2021 Ghislaine Maxwell criminal trial because her credibility was in such tatters. The whole mythology around this case is largely based on the claims of one mentally unstable serial fabulist, Giuffre, who eventually had to admit in a civil settlement she had falsely accused Alan Dershowitz of depraved sexual crimes for nearly a decade. Nonetheless, she was able to eventually extract a few million pounds from Prince Andrew, the only other third-party individual she actually sued, despite naming a huge array of prominent individuals over the year with zero credible evidence, and despite having the dogged assistance of some of the most high-powered attorneys in the world. Prince Andrew, as Michael Tracy points out, was in the throes of a PR disaster after his infamous 2019 BBC interview. So opting for a settlement with royal family funds rather than standing trial in the United States was probably the sensible course of action from his perspective. This was the sole third-party settlement Giuffre ever successfully reached, despite claiming she was trafficked to an extraordinary cross-section of prominent individuals, including George Mitchell, Bill Richardson, Marvin Minsky, etc. None of the women who testified in the Maxwell criminal trial claimed they were trafficked to third parties. Giuffre, clearly in the grips of a worsening psychological crisis, died earlier this year. Unfortunately, but doesn't change the fact that so many of her wild, extravagant claims turned out to be totally baseless, despite serving as the evidentiary foundation for this blinkered Epstein mythology, which continues to persist despite an increasingly tenuous connection to any observable reality, having been egged on recently, playing to the fevered imaginations of right-wing social media. The entire Epstein saga, says Michael Tracy, has long since turned into an enormous cash cow, with even J.P. Morgan settling for $290 million simply because Epstein was a former client. The feeding frenzy litigation has been endless from every angle and is still ongoing. We're supposed to believe that not one of these rich and powerful American men, to whom everyone assumes Epstein must have trafficked scores of children, could have been successfully sued at any point in the past 10 plus years and coerced into a generous settlement, particularly in the context of Me Too mania, from which this affair gained such outsized cultural notoriety. Epstein himself was clearly a dirtbag and openly confessed to a pathological obsession with procuring teenage girls for himself. But the grander web of creepy conspiratorial intrigue that's enveloped this case and turned it into a weird, tantalizing, unfalsifiable mythology that won't go away is just an extension of the unhinged fabulism pioneered by the original accuser. That seems to me the most obvious answer to what the hell was going on here. And again, open questions are open. But at a certain point, if the FBI and the DOJ not run by Democrats, first of all, we should point out, Democrats running the FBI and the DOJ would have had a pretty large incentive, would they not, to have dumped an Epstein file on, say, Donald J. Trump. Would they not? I mean, we know for a fact that in 2016, the intelligence community coordinated to set up an entire op surrounding Donald Trump's supposed collusion with Russia. Do you think that under the auspices of Joseph R. Biden and the rest of the Biden administration, if they had one single iota of evidence, for example, that Jeffrey Epstein had been trafficking underage girls to Donald Trump, that wouldn't have been on the front page of every single newspaper in the world the next day? Like the day after Joe Biden was elected? Are we really to believe that? Seriously? It strains credulity. And as far as the accusations about these other men, again, these are very prominent men. Michael Tracy's making a good point. The burden of proof in a civil trial is much lower than the burden of proof in a criminal trial. All you have to do is win by preponderance of the evidence. And when you're talking about young girls, now young women or middle-aged women, suing powerful older men, the possibility of a settlement is very high. So why weren't there any of those things? Right? A lot of that was studiously avoided during all of the Epstein talk, which again was spicy and interesting and fascinating because conspiracies are usually spicy and interesting and fascinating. And of course, Epstein's death was suspicious. And by the way, the memes were funny. I mean, let's be real. The memes were funny of Hillary Clinton sneaking into jail at night to get Bill Clinton off scot-free because he was trafficking in girls. And Jeffrey Epstein was a weirdo with pictures of Bill Clinton in a dress, aside from being a sick sexual deviant who should have been arrested and executed a long time ago for his crimes against children. Okay, so put all of that aside. What does this demonstrate? Well, it demonstrates that once a conspiracy theory gets going, it becomes utterly unfalsifiable. Utterly unfalsifiable. And no matter how much evidence is provided, and even if the people you trust are put in charge, it's still even more unfalsifiable. So listen, it's justifiable for people like J.D. Vance, who was the vice presidential candidate at the time before the election, to call for the release of an Epstein list because, frankly, people thought there was an Epstein list. However, the evidence suggested there really was not an Epstein list if you were watching this case with any sort of eagle eye. This is J.D. Vance before the election.
Everybody in politics has a vice that's much worse than alcoholism is the way that I put it. But we
release the list.
Seriously, we need to release the Epstein list. That is an important thing.
Okay, so the problem is that when you feed this, at a certain point, it's going to blow back on you when it turns out that you open Al Capone's vault, like Geraldo Rivera, and there's nothing there, which is actually what seems to have happened right here. The person who's receiving the most blowback on this, of course, is Attorney General Pam Bondi, because Attorney General Bondi back in February had suggested that the Epstein list was sitting on her desk. Don't say this sort of stuff if you don't got the goods. If you don't got the goods, don't say it. But again, this goes to our social media-driven age where you are likely to score points and garner loyalty for making commitments that you can't actually cash in.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that. I'm reviewing JFK files, MLK files. That's all in the process of being reviewed because that was done at the directive of the president from all of these agencies.
And again, one of the things that's come out with regard to pretty much all of this stuff is that what we knew is what we knew, right? There was nothing new in the JFK files. Legitimately nothing new that was revelatory or even interesting about what was released in the JFK files. It didn't matter. The internet tried to spin it into a conspiracy theory anyway, because that's what happens. Caroline Leavitt was forced into the uncomfortable position yesterday at the White House of trying to retcon those comments from Pam Bondi.
According to the report, this systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. So what happened to the Epstein client list that the Attorney General said she had on her desk?
Well, I think if you go back and look at what the Attorney General said in that interview, which was on your network on Fox News.
Got the quote.
Go ahead.
John Roberts said, DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen? And she said, it's sitting on my desk right now to review.
Yes, she was saying the entirety of all of the paperwork, all of the paper in relation to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. That's what the Attorney General was referring to, and I'll let her speak for that.
Okay, fine. I mean, fine. That's not how it reads. That's not how it sounds. But okay, I mean, I suppose that you could make that case. Bottom line is this. When everybody engages in outsized speculation, the outsized evidence better stack up at a certain point. And if it doesn't, if your expectations of a gigantic conspiracy don't come true and you have no counter evidence, none except for your speculation, I'm sorry, but that's on you. It is. I mean, if you want to provide counter evidence, I'm happy to hear it. Seriously. If you want to provide me the actual, not just your speculation, not just your sort of suggestions, not your wild, outlandish theories, speciously based on nothing, right? And all of that is open. But I'm sorry, when you put Kash Patel and Dan Bongino in charge of the FBI, and we put Pam Bondi in charge of the DOJ, and then it turns out that there's nothing there, I don't know what more you expect. What do you think? They're all part of the conspiracy? And the answer is, of course, yes. That is always the next step. You're seeing people online suggesting now that Kash Patel is being blackmailed by his girlfriend because his girlfriend works for PragerU. I mean, and Prager and Dennis Prager is Jewish. Of course, you can always go down the next conspiratorial rabbit hole. That's the beauty of conspiratorial rabbit holes. When one of them gets debunked, you just dive right into the next conspiratorial rabbit hole, and they all tie together in a gigantic ball of spaghetti that is a global unifying world theory that in the end is about some sort of conspiratorial elite controlling your life. Or maybe fact and evidence should be necessary when you make outsized allegations. Outsized allegations require outsized evidence. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, let's talk about poison in the water, the kind that doesn't go away. Toxic industrial waste leaches into our water supply, leaving PFAS in your water. These are called forever chemicals because once they're in the water supply, they stay, they don't break down. Up to 95 million Americans have PFAS in their drinking water. They've been linked to all sorts of issues: cancer, hormonal effects, developmental issues in kids. As a parent of 4 kids, my wife and I aren't taking any risks. That's why we purify our water with the best filtration system on the market. It's called Cove Pure. Not only is it third-party tested to remove over 99% of PFAS, but Cove Pure also removes heavy metals, nitrates, microplastics, hundreds of other contaminants. Think bottled water is a good alternative? Not quite. Researchers discovered 38% of U.S. bottled water samples had PFAS in them. Plus, the bottles are full of microplastics. What I love most about Cove Pure is it gives you water at whatever temperature you want, instantly. Hot, warm, cold. Just press a button. And it tastes incredible. We use Cove Pure in our office. It makes a gigantic difference. Clean water. It's one of the best investments you can make for you and your family. And because we partnered with them, they're giving you $200 off if you use my link in the description box, covepure.com/Shapiro. Again, this doesn't mean that conspiracies never take place. There was a conspiracy with regard to, for example, covering up the possibility of Wuhan lab leak. That was a real thing that happened, where Anthony Fauci and members of the health establishment attempted to legitimately silence people who made the case that COVID was leaked from a Chinese lab. Like, those things happen, but here's the thing. There's evidence that they happened. There's evidence that they happened. Before that, you could speculate maybe that was true. And if you kept an open mind, you say, okay, if there's new evidence, I'll change my mind on that stuff. Then when the evidence emerged, then you could say, hey, look, evidence. This is why I've been asked before, are there any conspiracy theories that I believe? And, you know, the question as to whether I believe there are conspiracy theories that could be plausible, but I don't believe in any conspiracy theory unless there's actual evidence that makes it not a conspiracy theory anymore, just a conspiracy. That's when you should believe in things, is when there's evidence of them that is at least plausible in nature. But as you can see, the conspiratorialists are very, very upset with the Trump administration. Now they believe the conspiracy goes even deeper. So Alex Jones, who has yet to find a conspiracy he doesn't believe in, is about to go throw up, which frankly might be good for his weight loss program.
I just got to the office. I'm going to go throw up, actually. And this only happens every few years when something really, really bad happens or something. I mean, I'm physically going to puke probably right now. My mouth is watering right now. It's because I have integrity. And, you know, I just really need the Trump administration to succeed and to save this country, and they're doing so much good. And then for them to do something like this tears my guts out.
Guys, he has integrity. In fact, he's been called by some a prophet. Tucker Carlson literally called him a prophet on his program. So actually, this is a person whose own lawyer made the case in a custody hearing with his ex-wife that he was a performance artist. This wasn't even the Sandy Hook trial where he tried to make the same case. His lawyers claim that this man of integrity is, in fact, a performance artist. Quote, he's playing a character and is nothing like his online persona, attorney Randall Wilhite reportedly insisted in a Texas courtroom at a pre-trial hearing ahead of the right-wing radio jock's custody battle with ex-wife Kelly Jones. Judging Jones by his InfoWars performances would be like judging Jack Nicholson by his depiction of the Joker on Batman. That's his own lawyer saying that. His own lawyer is saying that he was a performance artist. Okay, that's his wife was making the case that actually he's just unstable. Quote, he's not a stable person. He says he wants to break Alec Baldwin's neck. He wants J-Lo to get... His lawyer was like, no, he doesn't mean any of that. He's a performance artist. Okay, so those are your choices. So I'd just like to point out once again, at this point, you can watch whatever you want. It is a free country. You can watch Alex Jones. You can believe Alex Jones. You can think Alex Jones. You're entitled to any of those beliefs. That's fine. It's a free country. On a moral and intellectual level, it is not so fine. Because it turns out that people who consistently traffic in conspiracy, it turns out that people who consistently traffic in trash, people who spend your time, your few brief breaths on this planet, filling your mind with stupidity, playing a WWE character. Listen, if you want to watch Alex Jones in the same way that you watch WWE, because you know that the WWE is people who are fake jumping on each other and you find it dramatic and interesting, you know, more power to you. But if you're watching WWE and you think it's real, that makes you the stupid person. Don't do it. Don't do it. Seriously, it makes you dumber. It just makes you... In the end, you're responsible for the information that enters your brain and your independent judgment of that information. But if people are consistently being inauthentic, if people openly acknowledge that what they're saying to you publicly and what they say privately are two different things on the same matters, well, then maybe you ought to take what they say with a grain of salt rather than suggesting that, for example, Donald Trump is lying to you about Jeffrey Epstein, or Dan Bongino, with whom I am friends, is lying to you about Jeffrey Epstein, or Kash Patel, the head of the FBI, is lying to you about Jeffrey Epstein, because those are your only two choices here. Either Alex Jones, as is usual, blew a conspiracy theory out of proportion, and so did the rest of the internet, or Dan Bongino and Kash Patel and Donald Trump are all lying to you. Those are your choices. There is no third choice. President Trump, for his part, says, quote, the FBI, under the direction of Director Kash Patel and Deputy Director Dan Bongino, is back to the basics, locking up criminals, cleaning up America's streets. We have the greatest law enforcement professionals in the world, but politics and corrupt leadership often prevented them from doing their job. That is no longer the case, and now they've been unleashed to do their jobs, and they're doing just that. Keep it up. Make America safe again. So that's President Trump defending the people that he selected for these jobs. And again, I'm just going to point out for the 1,000th time here, Dan Bongino and Kash Patel were both suspicious of the Epstein list stuff. They were both into the theorizing, and then they saw the evidence. And like the honest people they are, they came to a conclusion about that evidence, period. You may not come to that same conclusion, but now you should be forced to provide your evidence before you call people like Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, and by the way, the President of the United States, liars on this matter. So why is there such resistance? Once the conspiracy is essentially exploded by people like Kash Patel and Dan Bongino and President Trump and Pam Bondi and all the rest, once that happens, why do people double down? And the question has to be answered by looking at the mentality of people who do the doubling down. Again, you can believe this stuff or speculate about this stuff, but once the evidence comes out, that's a different class of people who've decided to double, triple, quadruple down and look for a way to somehow weasel their way out of having provided any evidence. It's a worldview. And that worldview basically says that there's always an elite that is controlling the events in your life. And those elites are able to get away with literally anything. They have almost godlike powers over your life. And once those elites are unmasked, then suddenly the world will become a better place. And so every time it turns out that a conspiracy theory is untrue, it undermines your case unless you make the case that actually the elites got away with it again, in which case you are strengthening your case. Actually, a conspiracy debunked in many cases for these folks actually strengthens their broader great conspiracy theory, which is that there is a group of small elites who are running every aspect of your life and they get away with everything. And when they get away with this one, it actually makes you more passionate about the fact that they got away with it, as opposed to maybe taking a look at your core theory, which is, no, maybe there isn't this like small group of elite who's controlling every aspect of your life. Again, this doesn't mean that every conspiracy is untrue. There are conspiracies that exist, and we don't even argue on them. Right? Alex Jones and I may agree that there was a conspiracy to silence the Wuhan lab leak theory. The question is, why double down on theories that are already debunked? Why double down on theories that are widely derided as dumb? Why double down on theories that have no evidence to them? And the answer is, those are precisely the theories you must double down on. You must. Because if there is a group of unanswerable, unpunishable elites, it excuses all of your day-to-day life. It excuses your activities. It excuses your failures. It excuses why you're so angry at, quote unquote, the system. And it requires no actual action from you other than railing at the moon. Well, that's all for now, folks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts down below. Be sure to check out all of the other great content on my channel. I'll see you here next time.